About 3 or 4 months ago, I did a review on the Bluetti EB3A, which is a small entry-level, kind of a lower capacity power station, relatively inexpensive, actually very inexpensive, and it had surprisingly good performance and kind of punched well above its weight class. But today we're going to take a look at the slightly bigger sibling of the EB3A, the Bluetti EB55. And we're going to compare it to some other similar capacity power stations in that class to find out how it stacks up. Is it worth a look? Let's find out. All right, per usual, we got to get this thing out of the box. All right, right out of the gate, we get a what I assume is a user guide, perhaps, or not. Yep, one user manual, nothing but the facts. And it looks like a warranty card with a 2-year warranty. One charge brick, which is kind of interesting because I don't think the EB3A has a charge brick, but apparently the EB55 does. We also get an MC4 cable to XT60, a car charger to XT60, and then finally just a standard AC cable for the charge brick. And looks like they give you a little cable management strap as well. All right, this is the EB55. It really is just basically a slightly larger clone of the EB3A. And it, even though it's double the capacity, it's not double the size. I would say it's about 30% bigger if I had to eyeball it. It looks like it does have wireless charging on top. 4 AC ports on it, 2 of which are capable of accepting 3-prong. A couple of DC 5521s, your standard 12-volt car port. Looks like maybe I can't tell if it's a DC 5521 or maybe it's a DC 7909. I'll have to confirm that. But anyway, XT60 as we expected. And then we've got, looks like 5 USB ports, one of which is a Type C and is a PD 100 watt. So that's cool. And then you've got, looks like just 4 kind of standard, maybe 18 watt Type A USB ports. So kind of interesting to me that there's only one Type C port. I'm starting to see more Type C ports in power stations. In fact, one that I reviewed recently didn't have any Type A ports at all. So I think that was the Zenjer Super Bass Pro, maybe? Anyway, we have nothing on the sides, and then looks like we got a light on the back. Am I just imagining things? Or does the EB3A not have a charge brick? I just want to double check that. Yeah, you just plug the power cable right into the front. So the EB3A does not have a charge brick. Now, as I've said in other reviews, I'm kind of ambivalent about the whole charge brick kind of argument. There are pros and cons to it, as I've said in previous videos. The obvious pro is that if you have a problem with the AC adapter, you just buy a new AC adapter and you're off to the races. On the other hand, if it's integrated into the unit and you have a problem with it, well, now you've got a problem with the entire unit, and it's not so simple as just replacing the charge brick. The other possible pro of having an external is that you don't have the heat that the AC adapter part generates inside the unit. So it helps keep the unit cooler while it's charging, which is easier on the batteries. It's less stress on the battery cells. How much of a difference that makes, I'm not really sure, but it is a difference. And the other obvious con, though, is that you have one extra thing to manage instead of just a simple power cable. I got to remember to bring the brick along. So, it's kind of a wash in my opinion. So, just something to be aware of. All right, so let's jump forward in time after I've had a chance to run this thing through the paces for a few weeks, and we'll find out how it performs. I'll see you in a couple seconds. All right, we are back. I think I've got a pretty good feel for the EB55 and what it's all about. And we are going to talk a little bit about how it is different, because we've already seen that it is fairly different than the EB3A, and those differences actually do go well beyond just a difference in capacity, even though they are both part of the same Bluetti family. But we're going to also talk about how it kind of matches up to something like, say, this To-Go Power A650, which is a little bit more of a direct matchup to the EB55. And we're also going to kind of contrast how it's different between the A650 and something like the Jackery Explorer 500, which I do not have, but I do have the 300 and the 1000. So I have a pretty good idea of what the Explorer 500 is all about as well. But before we get into those comparisons, let's talk a little bit more just about how the EB55 performs. Now, one test that I like to run on all the power stations that I review is its usable capacity. And that's something that is very different typically than its rated capacity. And I always like to find out how much you can really actually use. So I did run the EB55 on the usual battery of tests to find out what its usable capacity is. And let's go see how that went. We're going to do a DC discharge test. So the 12 volt port here is a 12 volt 10 amp. Yeah, so this does not let you exceed 10 amps at all. So 10 amps is a serious hard cutoff. All right, let's let this thing run and find out how many watt hours we get. All right, as you can see, we are fully depleted. Looks like we got 400 and call it 61 watt hours. All right, we'll charge this thing back up and we'll do an AC discharge test. Yep, we're at 100%. Let's fire it up and see how we do. All right, we have finished the discharge capacity test on the EB55. Let's see what we ended up with. 463 watt hours. So as you saw, we got pretty consistent numbers on both the AC and the DC discharge tests, showing us that the usable capacity is about 463 watt hours, which is about 86% of the rated capacity of 537 watt hours. And as you saw during the DC discharge test, when we actually tested the output on this 12 volt port here, that 10 amp current limit is very hard. I mean, it will not let you exceed that at all. In fact, I had a little trouble getting it up to 10 amps. It was about, I think I did the actual test at about 9.15 amps or somewhere in that vicinity, maybe 9.2. Definitely not going to let you go higher than 10 amps. We know that for sure. Now, I also like to test for no load draw on the AC inverter. So how much power does the AC inverter consume when you don't have a load on it if you leave the AC inverter on? Now, that's very tricky. I actually couldn't really do that and get any sort of a precise number with this unit. And the reason for that is the granularity of the state of charge is only in 20% increments. So it was very hard for me to tell exactly how much capacity I was losing from any hour to the next hour. I couldn't do it. I think it's somewhere between 1% and 2%, but I just don't know. I will say that the auto shutoff seems to be somewhere in the 4-hour range. So somewhere around 4 hours, it might be right at 4 hours. I seem to have trouble catching it right when it shuts off, but it seems like between 4 and 5 hours, the AC inverter will automatically shut off if there's no load on the AC inverter. Since this doesn't have access to the Bluetti app, I don't have a way to configure how it behaves under the timeouts. So I can't configure the timeouts like I can with the EB3A using the Bluetti app. And that was something I really liked about the EB3A. And it would be nice to have an update in the display on the EB55 to more closely resemble what you get on the EB3A, so I get an actual numeric readout of the state of charge versus something that's blocked in increments of 20%. Now, I think I did mention the AC inverter on the EB55 is rated for 700 watts continuous and 1400 watts peak or surge, which is a very good spec for a power station in that mid-range kind of 500 watt hour range. So very good on that. Let's go see how it actually performed. All right, so we're just shy of 700. So I'm going to go ahead and dial that up with my battery tester here so I can pull some more watts. All right, we're still running strong at 760 watts. All right, now that we know that this thing will run very consistently at 700 watts and a little bit past that, let's go ahead and find out what its limit is and see how quickly it'll shut us down when we dramatically exceed 700 watts. So I'm going to use this space heater here, and it has a nice slow climb, and we'll be able to see kind of where it cuts us off. So let me go ahead and turn that on, and we'll just watch right here. So as soon as we hit 800 watts, hard cutoff. So I suspect somewhere in that 770 watt range or so, it will eventually cut you off. So as you saw, the inverter performs very well. We definitely can run this thing in that 700 watt, actually a little more than that, continuous, and it doesn't seem to have a problem with it at all. But once we get into the high 700s and definitely to 800, it will cut you off, kind of as you expect, but it is nice that it gives you, a little bit of leeway, a little bit of padding, a little headroom in that spec. And as far as I could tell, the 1400 watt peak or surge rating works fine as well, but you're obviously only going to get that for literally a split second, and then it will shut you down if it continues. And that's good for very high watt draw things like a full-size refrigerator, by the way. So I did actually test this with my full-size refrigerator. It handled the compressor startup on that, no problem. That 1400 watt surge was more than enough to handle a full-size refrigerator. But again, as I've said in previous videos, with a power station in this capacity class, not the best use case to try to run a full-size refrigerator. Now you can do dual charging on this, which means you can put 200 watts AC, which is the standard input through the AC charge brick. And this does charge pretty quickly under that particular condition. So 3 hours from 0 to 100%, which is not bad. But you can also simultaneously be charging it through solar, up to 200 watts on solar. So you can get very fast charge, about an hour and a half fast charge time if you were to max this thing out on AC and solar. I'm not sure that's a very common use case, but it is something that they let you do. Now on the USB ports, I did mention previously that it does have this single PD 100 watt port right there. Now that is an output only, it is not an input. All right, let's talk about how the EB55 kind of stacks up to some of its more direct competition, like the To-Go Power A650. These are basically in that sort of 500 watt hour capacity class, and also something like the Jackery Explorer 500. Now, as I mentioned, I don't have that one, but I have the 300 and the 1000, and I'm pretty well dialed in on what the Jackery Explorer series is all about. So I'll put a little matrix up here on the screen you can take a look at with me, and we'll kind of go down through this. So as you can see, the price on the EB55 is $499. The A650 is about the same price, although it's currently on sale for $419, and the Jackery Explorer 500 is also on sale right now for $425, at least at the time that I'm doing this video. So the pricing differential between these units is not great, although the EB55 is a little more expensive than the other two, at least compared to their sales prices. Now, in terms of warranty, these are all 2-year warranties, so no difference there. Now, if we look at battery chemistry, this is where we actually get a significant difference. So the Bluetti EB55 is using LiFePO4 lithium iron phosphate chemistry versus lithium NMC on both the To-Go Power and the Jackery E500. Now, why that's maybe a significant deal for you is that on the lithium NMC, you do not get as many full charge cycles, full charge and discharge cycles in the battery life. You may get between 500 and 800, where after that point, you will retain about 80% of your original battery capacity. Now on the Bluetti EB55, because it's using LiFePO4 battery chemistry, you're going to get somewhere between 2,500 and around 3,000 full charge discharge cycles, where it's maintaining its 80% of its original capacity. So that's about a times 6 battery life cycle, which is a pretty significant advantage. And that by itself is probably worth the 15 to 18% more you're probably going to pay for the EB55 versus something like the To-Go Power A650 or the Jackery Explorer 500. Now, both the EB55 and the A650 have wireless charging. The Explorer 500 does not, which is not a surprise because I don't think any of the Jackeries have wireless charging. And none of the 3 units in this particular capacity class have app support, which is something, again, I think I would go back and say that would be nice for Bluetti if they could update this thing to kind of bring it up to the same level of additional features that the EB3A has. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that they plan at some point in the future. Let's get into some of the pros and cons on the EB55 as I see them, and let's start with the cons. I think, as I just said, I really would like to see app support because the Bluetti app is very good, and I think it offers a lot of user value with the EB3A, and I'd love to see them add that to the EB55. The other thing is I also already previously mentioned is that the display only gives you those 20% increments. So you don't really get very much granularity in terms of understanding what your state of charge is. Do I have 60% state of charge or do I have 75% state of charge? I don't know. It just says 60. I can't really tell. It would be nice to have that level of granularity in the state of charge reader. And it's not a deal breaker, but it's just one of those things that would be nice to have. Now, the last con I can think of, and this really is not a con, but it's a little bit more expensive than the other units in its class, at least between the To-Go Powers and the Explorer 500. But and the reason I don't think this is a con is I think the battery chemistry alone, which is like the very first pro that I'm going to mention, the advantage, justifies that difference in price. And getting into some of the other pros for the EB55, where it really kind of shines, is that 700 watt continuous inverter. That extra inverter capacity just means you have more options. Getting double the solar input up to 200 watts, whereas the other ones only give you 100 watts, is again a definite advantage for the EB55. And whether you're recharging this thing via solar or via AC, you've got that 200 watt input max, which allows you to charge this thing in half the time that it takes you to charge something like the A650 or the Jackery Explorer 500. So if you are in the market for something in this 500 watt hour capacity, I definitely think you want to take a look at the EB55. It's definitely a solid choice. And I think it definitely beats the other two that I talked about in this particular lineup. Oh, before I forget to mention it one last time, if you are wanting to get more information on either the EB55 or the A650 or the Explorer 500, I will put links in the description below for you to kind of conveniently go check those out. Yes, they are affiliate links, and yes, I do get a small commission if you buy something that doesn't change your price, but that's how I justify spending so many hours doing these videos. So hopefully you found some of this information useful. If you did, please consider giving me a thumbs up on the video. I'd really appreciate that. I've got a bunch more DIY topics coming up regarding batteries and solar and power stations, and actually a few other things that are also in the queue. So stay tuned for those. I do hope to see you in the next one. Until then, have fun out there.